Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today I'm going to be analysing an oldie but goldie. A piece of media injected with a high dosage of passion and one of my personal favourite TV shows of all time. Its cancellation is sadly one of the main points of discussion nowadays, becoming a perfect example of studios and production companies being stubborn enough to think they know better than their audience. However, I think there is much more to unpack, with a bunch of things left unsaid after the show went off the air. With the cult following of this show never truly going away, I thought there would be plenty of people who would be interested to see a thorough exploration of this show. I recommend you go and watch the pilot episode titled Serenity that I'll be covering today, obviously for new time viewers and to refresh the memories of those that have seen it already. One of the main aspects of Firefly that warrants credit is the intricate network of thoroughly fleshed out characters. This is done through a combination of excellently written scripts that provide flavourful dialogue and colourful characters that are supported by some highly emotive performances from the cast. The dialogue in the opening sequence gives our two main characters, Mal and Zoe, flair, whilst giving context to their situation from here on out. Their rogue nature we see manifested throughout the series is a result of this defining moment in war. Malcolm Reynolds is introduced as a natural-born leader with unflinching faith and dedication both in God and Zoe. His time to shine is cut short, however, when his request for air support is denied, and a command to surrender to the Alliance is given. All the optimism he had for victory is cast aside as a soldier he assured wouldn't die for being so pretty is shot in slow motion. The lighting on his face here shows a crack in his loyalty to his faction, and the close-up on his face plays as a motif throughout the episode in moments of emotional distress. 6 years later, we see Mal and Zoe attempting some form of heist on the wreckage of a spaceship. The use of sound in Firefly is also noteworthy, as the silence of space adopted here appears to be a little nod to 2001: A Space Odyssey, alongside the lonely sounds of their voices and breathing. This transformation of sound contrasts well with the previous scene, as we hear the sneaky lifestyle the crew have now adopted. We are then introduced to the childlike wonder of the pilot Wash, who, by playing with dinosaur toys, indicates potential loneliness whilst the rest of the crew are off doing this shady work under the nose of the Alliance. This has the effect of him being distracted from the appearance of a giant Alliance cruiser coming their way. We are also introduced to the country-style music that resonates throughout the series in this sequence, which is an aspect that makes Firefly an unusual science fiction series, seeing as traditionally the science fiction genre adopts grand operatic or ethereal space tunes that reflect tradition or the time period the film was made in. However, Firefly's music presents a boastful, homey feeling, reflecting Mal and the crew's problem with authority. This is also shown through the towering size of the Alliance cruiser, showing just how tyrannical the Alliance have become. We also get clues to this through the dehumanizing attitude of the commander on board the cruiser, who doesn't even bother to chase after them as he refers to them as vultures and roaches. Perhaps the most significant and telling aspect of the sound, however, lies in the awesome and catchy theme tune that was written by Joss Whedon himself. The lyrics seem to indicate that Mal's disinterest in material accomplishments, take my love, take my land, which is echoed in the scene beforehand when he shrugs off what they've acquired from the heist. His only wish is to be free to fly in space. Another incredible contribution on the part of the director is the world-building aspects of the series. The very tiniest of details get introduced in this busy scene on Persephone. I don't doubt certain aspects will get lost on certain viewers though, perhaps leaving them feeling alienated by all the rapid-fire dialogue that goes on regarding the models of ships, various planets and locations, characters, all of which are relevant, but it is a lot to soak up. A first-time viewer might be tempted to flick over to something else when they're thrown all these gobbledygook terms at them so early on. What makes matters worse is when characters occasionally speak or curse in Mandarin. To expect the audience to pay attention to what are seemingly insignificant details and then throwing this curveball of language every now and again would make them think they're missing something. Herein lies the beauty of this sequence though. We are introduced to the integration of the Chinese into this futuristic world visually, like them cooking up dog meat, wearing oriental clothing, and Chinese symbols being splattered across the sets. This displays intelligence and foresight on the part of the creators of this show, as 3 years after it was broadcasted, the Chinese had their first successful manned space mission. To also counter this idea that these details are potentially arbitrary, we have plenty of payoff for aspects that are introduced in this scene. Take the box that Shepard gives to Kaylee as payment for boarding Serenity, which contains a strawberry. This probably seems like a strange thing to be considered luxury to people in the 21st century, but it demonstrates the unearthly nature of the show. They're so far in the future and so far away from Earth that it isn't even mentioned. If strawberries are treated like delicacy, we get some indication of how rife with desperation these characters have become. What I think this indicates is that a level of patience is required on the part of the viewer to truly appreciate this show. The same can undoubtedly be said for Whedon's inclusion in the Marvel franchise too, considering that in my opinion one cannot truly appreciate the Avengers movies he directed without having witnessed all the MCU films that came out beforehand. It's not surprising therefore that Whedon would be hired by Marvel years later, considering what an excellent and underappreciated job he did on Firefly. We also get some insight into the value of maintaining a ship. He talks about how taking passengers on board won't be enough to fund anything, and he also has two hot-headed men on board that want some reward for their hard work. Later on in the episode, after River gets woken up, he flat out calls his operation a business. It's interesting that Whedon's take on the future isn't what we will be getting is going to be any better, and that life will still be hard, if not harder, with the complexities of interplanetary existence added on top. So the crew take off, and I think it has to be said that the CG does look quite outdated now. This isn't really a criticism though, because these exterior shots are used sparingly and the sets designed for the ship's interiors compensate well for this. We have a lot of personality to the kitchen area, for example. One could hazard a guess these flowery decorations were added by Kaylee to give the ship a more homely feel. It's interesting because I saw the exact opposite happen when I saw Alita in the cinema last week. It had some amazing computer-generated visuals that completely outclassed this pilot in every way, and yet all of the sets and locations in Alita were boring and didn't add any flavor to what was happening in the story. I can only imagine how blown away I would have been had I been able to watch this show when it was aired on TV. Oh wait, the pilot wasn't aired until all the other episodes were aired, so God, that is such a douchey thing to do. I mean, how could anybody have context for anything that happens in the rest of the series without having seen this pilot? I mean, I can understand it's a bit ambitious to create a movie-length pilot, but it's like Fox didn't even watch the damn thing. We're also entertained by the morals and ethics of all those on board, as we see the tightened security and judgments of Mal, with a combination of mistrust and deception being made apparent to the new members of the crew. We find out during this dinner scene that Mal's religious faith we saw him possess in the opening scene is now lost, displaying him as a desperate and bitter man. The Shepard and the Doctor are utilized more frequently in terms of screen time and dialogue to cloud our judgment so that we don't suspect Dobson. We are then graced with a beautiful sequence of upscaling intensity as all judgments and deception lead to a catastrophic disaster. So many twists and turns take place in such a small amount of time in this scene, the main one being Dobson, who is revealed to be the mole, who cleverly by design looks like a mole too. It's also revealed that it's Simon Dobson is after and not Mal. Dobson reveals that everyone on board is now culpable and that he'd shoot anyone to get what he needs. This leads to Kaylee, the most innocent and smiley one of all, to get shot, escalating the situation even further. Hostilities increase with people who had nothing to do with the initial conflict pointing guns at each other, with Wash informing them the Alliance has caught up with them. Not a single character on board hasn't been dragged into this nightmare, and despite this, the scene doesn't feel crowded at all. All of this pressure is accentuated through this close-up on Mal's face, and they decide to turn around. We learn from the segment of River's awakening that Mal is much more of a doer than a talker. He would rather see for himself what's inside Simon's crate than have the Doctor explain it away now that the plan has been put in jeopardy. I would even go as far as to say this is River's birth, seeing as she's lying in a fetal position when we first see her, and she screams out like a newborn babe in fear. The way that certain shots put her in a very small proportion of the frame describes how vulnerable she is, reinforcing this idea of her being a victim of child abuse at the hands of the government. Afterwards, Jane interrogates Dobson, where his character gets some fleshing out as it becomes clear that he could betray the entire crew at any time. We also know that money isn't exactly in abundance with this crew, which is Jane's primary drive, and the more dancing around that takes place among amongst the crew, the less likely Jane will be loyal to the captain. We even see the huge arsenal that Jane has hidden away in his room so that if he did want to take over, he very easily could. What's worse is the burden lies on Mal to keep everybody faithful and reliable, which is why the situation that's unfolding on board his ship is his worst nightmare. His merciless approach to leadership is brutal, but simultaneously one can understand why he would be so protective over his ship and crew. To add the cherry on the cake, however, is that another antagonistic faction has come along to meddle with things even more. The Reavers. The design of the Reavers' ship looks like a severed head of a shark, with grey tones and marks of red to entertain the idea of their savagery alongside Zoe's insidious descriptions of them. After all the chaos that has ensued, Kaylee wakes up in the infirmary chatting to Mal. Only here do we realise how fundamental to the crew she is, considering her ability to see the best in people. Not only does somebody get punched in the face, but torture also nearly took place whilst she wasn't around. She reassures the captain and passes on some friendly wisdom to lift his spirits, something nobody else in the crew could really provide. This has a direct effect on his conversation with Inara in the following scene, as he can't bring himself to snap a retort at her. He does unfortunately take it out on Simon after this, but just so that he can have a joke around with his crew. We see him genuinely smiling for the first time too. Despite the episode emphasizing the lack of civilizational development in the early scenes, I think it goes without saying that this aspect gets explored again once they travel to the outer reaches of space. The country-style score ties into this nicely as it becomes more prominent when the characters reach Whitefall, making an interesting combination of the Western and sci-fi genres. Humans in this setting are technologically advanced but have socially regressed, having to essentially reboot society on uninhabited planets. We learn from Patience that she has become a mayor of sorts, and if the cowboys have taken over, then survival of the fittest is still taking place and civilized society is being put under the boot of violent people. This rings true because when Mal doesn't get his desired outcome, he kills Patience's crew. Even more cruel is how he will unflinchingly kill a horse to trap Patience. Additionally, no futuristic weapons are used in this episode. Evidently, sniper rifles and pistols still do a good enough job at giving a person dominance, displayed not only by the standoff going down on Whitefall, but also as Dobson starts holding people at gunpoint on board Serenity. Simon finally musters the strength that makes Mal proud, proving that he can be a valuable member of the team. This opens the possibility that Simon might actually have to kill somebody in the future, as both the character and the audience are faced with this moral conundrum of upholding the law or keeping people safe. The various models of ship that were briefly acknowledged throughout the episode finally get some payoff in the escape plan too. Serenity has the ability to change direction entirely in seconds, unlike the Reaver ship that appears to be running on coal or something with all the smoke coming off it throughout its flight. Wash also gets the reward he deserves by the end too, providing a very satisfying conclusion for all those on board. Despite their victory, however, Shepard has had to put his own faith into question over the course of the past 2 days. Inara then shows herself to be a true companion in this moment as she consoles him, recommending that he stays on board to see the universe and human beings in their truest and ugliest forms instead of being hidden away in an abbey. The final conversation between Mal and Simon drives home the theme that was introduced in the lyrics of the opening title sequence. So long as the ship keeps moving, they can remain safe and operate in the way that gives them the most liberty. Not only is there bitter irony in this, given how open and limitless the universe is, but there's purpose to be found amongst this family unit. Simon doesn't find much value in the idea of being able to fly freely amongst the stars, but for Mal, this is enough. Not only does the final line he says instantiate his authority as captain of the ship, but also hits home the idea of how satisfying it is to be free from tyranny. A medic is undoubtedly required for the dangerous tasks ahead, and it's not likely Simon and River would be able to find a place they would call home anytime soon. That was until they found Serenity. Thanks for watching. This video was a request from a King of the Castle patron. If you fancy supporting the channel, who knows, you might get a request video made in your honor too. Would you like to see more analysis of Firefly episodes? I think I'd really enjoy unpacking the episodes of such an incredible sci-fi series myself. Leave your comments below what you thought, or join the discussion on my Discord server. Link is in the description.